The shuttle's descent shook harder than expected, rattling the straps across my chest. Through the viewport, the alien capital unfurled beneath me, a lattice of silver towers veined with light, as if the city itself glowed with a pulse of quiet intelligence. The air shimmered with an aurora-like haze, evidence of the planet's unstable magnetic field. I'd been warned it might interfere with communication equipment, but no one had mentioned how breathtaking it would look from above. For all the diplomatic reports and data packets I had consumed on the journey here, nothing had prepared me for this living panorama. I was not sent to admire landscapes. My assignment, carved into the ink of an uneasy treaty, was simple: act as liaison, observe their military command, and report on whether this tenuous alliance had any chance of holding. The wars that brought us here had left scars across human space, and we were desperate to avoid repeating them. The alien empire, Veari, they called themselves, was proud, secretive, and rumored to distrust every outsider. My role was both honored and expendable, which meant I could either pave the way for trust or be quietly discarded should things sour. When the shuttle docked at a glass-paneled platform, a delegation awaited. Their posture radiated discipline. Tall figures draped in cobalt armor, skin faintly luminescent under the filtered light. They were humanoid enough to unsettle with their familiarity, yet the angular symmetry of their faces, the elongated eyes that shimmered like molten metal, reminded me that I had stepped far beyond Earth's cradle. At their center stood the woman I had read about in the intelligence briefings. She was no May officer. She was lineage and authority condensed into one presence. Her name, Terra, carried a weight that pressed against the chamber walls even before she spoke. While the others looked carved from stone, she carried something more fluid, more alive. Her eyes lingered on me with a measured intensity, neither hostile nor welcoming, but as if weighing the cost of every breath between us. The formalities began in their tongue, translated through a discreet device at my A. Phrases of respect, of caution, of alliances tested. I followed protocol, offering acknowledgments and affirmations, though my voice felt clumsy beside their flawless cadences. Then, unexpectedly, she dismissed the translators with a flick of her hand. Silence fell, thick enough to smother air itself. When she spoke, her voice was low but direct, shaped by an accent both harsh and melodic. "Human," she said, addressing me as though the word itself were a title. "I find difficulty speaking to you." The delegation stiffened. My instinct sharpened. Was this an insult? A challenge? But her next words staggered me. "Because you are beautiful." Time seemed to fracture. The phrase carried no hesitation, no trace of jest. It was as though she had confessed a state secret. Her entourage reacted instantly. Some glanced away in shock, others whispered behind taut lips. Even the guards shifted uneasily. Beauty, I realized, might not be a compliment in this culture. And yet my own response bypassed diplomacy, bypassed caution. Perhaps it was exhaustion from the journey, perhaps the absurdity of hearing those words in this crystalline hall. I smiled and said, without thinking, I said, and my voice carried louder than intended. The alien woman froze. The words hung in the chamber like a sudden blade. Her body went still, every line rigid as stone. Those molten eyes widened, not in outrage but in something stranger, disbelief, maybe vulnerability. Her subordinates recoiled as though my remark had detonated between us. A cold recognition slid into me. Whatever I had just spoken was a breach, maybe even sacrilege. I had meant it lightly, half in jest, but my voice had struck a nerve buried deep in their culture. For a moment, no one moved. Even the air seemed hesitant to flow. Her gaze locked onto mine, unblinking. The silence stretched, taut and unbearable, until it seemed the very treaty between our peoples might snap under its weight. My instincts screamed at me to retreat, to apologize, to smooth this over with the language of diplomacy. But another instinct, just as fierce, urged me to hold steady. To back down now might mean more than personal embarrassment. It could mark humanity as timid, unworthy of alliance. The standoff lasted only seconds, but each one felt sharpened to a knife's edge. The alien woman, Terra, commander, noble, mystery, remained utterly still, her breath shallow. I could not read her expression, whether fury or wonder, and the uncertainty twisted my stomach. When she finally moved, It was only her eyes, narrowing slightly, the faintest shift of light catching them. Her voice had not returned, nor her composure, but the sense was clear. I had crossed into forbidden territory. The consequences of that single phrase would not be immediate, but they would come. In that suspended moment, surrounded by watchful figures and the trembling echoes of my reckless words, one truth crystallized inside me. This alliance would not be won with reports and protocols. It would be decided in fragile instants like this, where one human phrase could alter the trajectory of two civilizations. The woman had frozen, but the future was anything but still. The reprimand arrived swiftly, as inevitable as gravity. Within hours of that fraught introduction, I was summoned into a chamber whose walls glittered with embedded crystals that pulsed faintly, like veins carrying light instead of blood. 3 Vayari officials stood before me, their postures stiff as iron rods. They spoke not with the translator, but directly, as though the gravity of my mistake required no mediation. "You have spoken irreverently," the eldest said, his voice like grinding stone. "You exposed a sacred quality as though it were a triviality." His gaze cut across me like a blade, and though his words were measured, I understood the warning beneath them. I forced myself to stand tall, even as unease coiled through my gut. Among my people, beauty is not sacred if it is hidden. It is truth, and truth should be spoken. Murmurs broke among them. One official's lips tightened, the other's brow furrowed. To them, my reasoning was either naive or offensive. The eldest shook his head, dismissing me with a gesture that was neither hostile nor forgiving. "Be cautious, human. Words can fracture more than weapons." The meeting ended with a heaviness that clung to me like dust. I walked the corridors of their great city with a sense that every luminous wall was now a watchful eye. My own thoughts circled relentlessly. Had I sabotaged the fragile trust we were meant to build? Or had I cracked open something none of them dared confront? The answer began to reveal itself when I was summoned again, this time, not by officials but by her. Terra. The chamber where she waited was unlike the sterile halls of governance. Draped with silken banners that shimmered faintly in the light, it carried a weight of privacy, almost intimacy. She stood at the center, posture composed, though her hands were clasped tighter than before. When her gaze found me, it lacked the frost of earlier. Instead, there was something searching in it. "You speak carelessly," she said at last, her voice quiet but edged. "And yet I cannot dismiss it. Do humans often speak of beauty without fear?" "Yes," I answered, too quickly, but truth required no pause. To us, beauty unacknowledged is a lie. We name it, even if it costs us. Her expression shifted minutely, like a ripple crossing still water. She turned from me, walking to the edge of the chamber, where a window revealed the vast city below, lights threaded like constellations across stone and air. Among my people, beauty is bound to power. To speak of it openly is dangerous. It stays desires, awakens rivalries, threatens order. Her voice softened, almost imperceptibly. "You placed me in peril when you named mine." I felt the weight of her words but did not flinch. "I didn't mean to endanger you. I meant only honesty." She faced me again, and in her eyes I saw not anger, but a puzzle unsolved. "Honesty. You wield it like a blade, without sheath. Do you not fear it will cut even you?" "I do," I admitted. "But silence can kill just as surely." For the first time, her composure cracked. A faint exhale escaped her, almost a laugh though quickly suppressed. She studied me, as though trying to reconcile contradiction itself. Then, unexpectedly, she began to ask questions. Not about treaties or military strategy, but about humanity itself. What binds your people, when fear is great? What compels loyalty, if not silence? "Trust," I said, "and sometimes defiance. We do not thrive by restraining every impulse. We thrive by admitting them, then deciding what to do next." Her gaze sharpened. "Defiance against whom?" "Your rulers. Even them, especially them, when they are wrong." She absorbed this with a gravity that unsettled me. For a long moment she was silent, eyes glinting in the dim light, before she spoke again. "In my world, defiance is not survival. It is annihilation." The confession lingered between us. I sense it was not strategy or lesson, but something closer to truth, as fragile as the one I had spoken before her court. And though I could not know the cost it carried, I felt the distance between us shrink, even slightly. But the walls beyond her chamber carried ears. In the following days, I noticed glances in the corridors, whispers cut short when I entered. The Veyari did not conceal their suspicion well. Rumors spread quickly that the human was corrupting the commander, that she entertained reckless philosophies. My presence, already precarious, was becoming a fracture line running through her authority. I should have tempered my speech, softened my stance. Yet every time I considered retreat, I remembered the way her eyes had shifted, just for a moment, when I spoke of truth. It was not triumph I saw there, but relief, as though my words had carved open a space she had long been denied. One evening, after another council session where her peers dismissed my presence with calculated indifference, she approached me in the dim corridor outside. Her guards lingered at a distance, shadows against the crystalline walls. She stopped close enough that I could see the faint luminescence in her skin, like stars pressed beneath the surface. Her voice was low, meant for me alone. "Do humans always speak so freely?" she asked, even when it could destroy them. I searched her face, trying to gauge whether the question was warning or wonder. "Not always," I said carefully. "But sometimes the risk is worth more than silence." Her eyes narrowed, but not in anger, more in contemplation, as though weighing the scale of two truths, her world's and mine. Then she inclined her head slightly, the smallest gesture of acknowledgement I had yet seen from her. The corridor stretched quiet around us, the city's glow bleeding through the walls. She turned and left without another word, but the question she carried lingered in me like an echo that refused to fade. For the first time since arriving, I sensed the true conflict was not between our peoples, but between the worlds we carried inside us, one bound by silence, the other by unflinching speech. And in that narrow space between them, she and I had begun to collide. The storm broke quietly, not with thunder or fire, but with whispers that spread like cracks through glass. I felt it in the way the gods shifted their weight when I entered a chamber, in the clipped tones of advisors who once masked their disdain beneath formality. My presence was no longer just tolerated, it was becoming ammunition. To them, I was not a liaison, but a contamination. And Terra, for all her poise, stood at the center of that growing fracture. It became undeniable when the first threat surfaced, veiled as warnings during a council assembly. A tall commander with eyes like molten iron spoke coldly, addressing her but cutting his gaze toward me. "Distraction weakens leadership. Entanglement with outsiders corrodes resolve." The words were sharpened, honed to wound without drawing open blood. The council chamber, vast and echoing, seemed to tighten around us. Terra's expression remained unreadable, but I saw the smallest twitch of her hand at her side, a flicker of restrained fury. Later, when the assembly dissolved into murmurs, she walked beside me in silence until we were alone in the passageways. Her steps were measured, each one like a drumbeat suppressing something deeper. Finally, she halted and faced me. "They speak of you as if you are poison," she said, her voice steady yet weighted. "They believe I am losing command because I have allowed you too near." I wanted to apologize, to take the burden from her shoulders, but the words stuck. "And what do you believe?" I asked instead. Her gaze lingered on me, unflinching, though something trembled behind it. "I believe you have unsettled me, and I do not know if that is strength or weakness." There was no reply safe enough to offer. Instead, silence bound us, filled only by the glow of the walls around us. Yet that silence did not separate us. It drew us closer, tethered by truths we had no names for. The tension reached its breaking point not in council halls, but under the shadow of violence. It came without warning, in the form of an ambush as we crossed a narrow causeway suspended high above the city's lower tiers. The platform trembled underfoot, built of translucent stone that shone faintly from within. Guards flanked us, their movements disciplined, yet the attack was swift enough to fracture their formation before command could be issued. Figures in dark armor emerged from the shadows above, dropping with practiced precision. Their weapons glimmered with lethal intent, not ceremonial but meant for slaughter. One of Terra's guards fell instantly, crumpling in silence. Chaos surged, shouts and strikes colliding in the narrow space. Instinct, not training, drove me. I grabbed Tara's arm, pulling her behind a fractured wall of stone as energy bolts seared the air. The scent of scorched crystal bit my lungs. My heart thundered with the raw knowledge that this was no test, no display of power. This was assassination. She did not cower. Even as I tried to shield her, she tore free, drawing a blade of curved alloy from her side. With a cry sharp as a blade's edge, she struck back against the attackers. Her movements were fierce, fluid, honed by battles I had only read about. In that moment, I saw the warrior beneath the command, unmasked by ritual and council chambers. I fought clumsily compared to her, seizing a fallen god's weapon and firing blindly, but adrenaline made up for precision. One attacker fell, the others regrouped. I felt heat sear past my cheek, the sting of knee death grazing me. Through it all, my focus remained tethered to her, keeping her in sight, ensuring she did not fall. When the last assailant crumpled beneath her blade, silence returned in jagged pieces, broken only by our ragged breaths. The causeway bore scars of fire, bodies sprawled across its shining surface. Tara stood tall amid the wreckage, her chest rising and falling with sharp rhythm, her weapon still slick with alien blood. Her eyes found mine, wide not with rage but something more complex. She stepped closer, close enough that the faint luminescence of her skin brushed against the shadows across my face. Her voice was a whisper, but it carried more weight than any council decree. You risked yourself without hesitation, even when you could have fled. I couldn't leave you, I said, my throat raw. The truth was simple, unadorned. For a moment, the fury in her seemed to waver, replaced by something softer, almost fragile. You speak as though I am more than command, as though I am seen. Her words trembled, though her body remained unshaken. I swallowed hard, searching her face. You are. To me, you are. The silence that followed was unlike the heavy voids of before. It was charged, alive, a suspension of two worlds colliding in one fragile moment. Then, as if afraid of what might emerge, she turned her gaze away, back toward the ruined causeway. Her guards reassembled, shaken but alive, moving quickly to secure the area. Their eyes avoided hers, perhaps in shame, perhaps in awe. Yet I knew this attack would not vanish into silence. It would ripple through her people, fuel for those already eager to condemn her. She sheathed a blade, her movements deliberate, every line of her posture reclaiming control. But when she spoke to me once more, her voice carried the weight of something changed. Perhaps, being human is not weakness, but power. Power that unsettles, because it does not fear to speak or to act. Her words left me suspended between pride and dread. Whatever bond had formed in that crucible of fire, it was no longer private. It would spread, just as the whispers had spread before. Only now, the whispers would not speak of corruption alone. They would speak of alliance, of defiance, of danger greater than any weapon. And though the battle had ended, I knew with chilling certainty that the war for her future, and mine, had only just begun. The aftermath of the ambush was not silence but noise sharpened into accusation. The council chamber, once a place of calculated restraint, now seethed with tension as voices clashed like blades. The attack had emboldened her rivals. They demanded answers. How had assassins reached her so easily? Why had the human lived when Vayari gods had fallen? And what corruption had lured her into vulnerability? Each question was barbed, each syllable meant to slice through her command. Tara stood at the center of it all, composed yet rigid, her figure backlit by the chamber's crystalline glow. To the council she was stone, but I knew the storm beneath her surface. Every accusation was not just about the attack, but about me, about the moment I had spoken words that no one else dared speak. They saw me as a contagion that had infected their commander, and now they sought to excise both of us. One elder, his voice brittle with age yet sharp with malice, rose above the others. You must denounce the human. Cast him from your side, or you will be cast down with him. The hall fell into a hush, the ultimatum echoing like a death sentence. All eyes fixed on her. I felt the urge to step forward, to absorb the venom meant for her, but instinct told me my voice would only sharpen their hostility. This was her battle, not mine. I waited, the weight of my breath caught in my chest. She did not falter. Slowly, deliberately, She raised her chin. Her voice, when it came, was steady and resonant, carrying not only to the council but beyond the chamber walls. You accuse me of weakness because I did not silence what was spoken. But I will not denounce him, for his words were not corruption. They were truth. Murmurs rippled like a wave crashing against stone. The council shifted in disbelief, but she pressed on, her tone rising with conviction. To see beauty and deny it is to live in lies. To speak it is to live in truth. This human spoke with courage, not deceit. If that unsettles you, then perhaps it is not I who am weakened, but you who are blind. The chamber fractured into uproar. Some shouted in outrage, others fell into uneasy silence. Yet among the younger officers and aides, I glimpsed a spark, an ember of something unspoken, perhaps admiration. Terra had not only defended me, she had declared war on the very silence that bound her people. The council ended without resolution, only fracture. But when we left the chamber, her steps were measured, her composure intact, though her eyes burned with a fire I had not seen before. She walked beside me as though the world itself pressed against her shoulders, yet she carried it with unyielding grace. Later, in the quiet of her private chambers, the fire softened. She dismissed her attendants, leaving only the two of us beneath the glow of the city lights seeping through the tall windows. For the first time, her armor of command seemed to loosen. She looked at me, not as commander or noble, but as a woman who had chosen truth at great cost. "You should not have stayed," she murmured, almost to herself. "Your presence endangers everything I have built." "I should have left," I admitted. "But I couldn't. Not after what we've shared." Her gaze lingered, steady but fragile. "And what have we shared? Human. Recklessness? Defiance? A moment of honesty that could tear apart two civilizations." "Something more," I said quietly. "A glimpse of what could exist if fear did not silence us." Her lips parted, as if to argue, but no words came. Instead, she stepped closer. The faint luminescence of her skin brushed against the shadows clinging to me. For a breathless instant, her hand lifted and hovered near mine, not touching but close enough that the air itself seemed to tremble. Among her people, I knew such gestures were rarer than spoken vows. "You have altered me," she whispered, voice barely audible. "No one has dared to see me beyond command. No one has dared to speak so plainly." I let my hand close the distance, only slightly, enough to feel the warmth of her skin. "And now?" I asked. Her eyes, molten and unblinking, locked onto mine. "Now I am no longer untouched by what you are, and that terrifies me more than any blade." Silence followed, but it was no longer the silence of fear or oppression. It was the silence of something unformed, fragile yet undeniable. A bond that could either shatter or reshape the future. When I finally left her chambers, the city seemed different, its glow sharper, its shadows deeper. I knew the council would not relent. They would see her defiance as betrayal, and my presence as poison. But beneath that threat lay a fragile promise, that honesty, reckless and unyielding, might ignite change where centuries of silence had prevailed. As I walked through the crystalline corridors, I realized one truth with clarity that steadied me despite the storm ahead. I had not only spoken words that unsettled her. I had spoken words that might alter the destiny of two worlds. And though the cost would be steep, I could not regret them. For when she looked at me, when she froze, when she trembled, when she finally allowed herself to be seen, I knew the future would never again belong to silence. Night settled over the alien city with a weight that felt almost deliberate, as though the darkness itself pressed down to test the strength of its people. From the balcony of my assigned quarters, I watched the spires glow faintly against the sky, their light fractured by drifting currents of mist. The beauty was undeniable, but I could not enjoy it. The council's hostility had sharpened into something more dangerous, and Terra's open defiance had placed her on a blade's edge. My words had kindled something in her, but they had also painted a target across her back. Sleep came reluctantly, shallow and restless, until the sharp hiss of my door's seals jolted me awake. I reached for the sidearm I had kept hidden, a human weapon grudgingly permitted, only to find Terra herself stepping into the room, unaccompanied. Her presence startled me more than any intruder could. She wore no ceremonial armor, No commanding robes, only a plain garment that made her seem almost unrecognizable. Almost human. "You are watched," she said simply, her voice a whisper despite the privacy. "They will move against you soon. Perhaps against us both." I sat up, tension winding tight through my chest. "You came here alone to warn me." "I came because the council believes I will break. They expect me to surrender you to preserve my command." Her gaze fixed on mine, steady yet filled with an emotion I could not name. "I do not know if I can fight them and survive. But I will not betray what has already begun between us." The honesty in her voice struck deeper than any blade. I stood, closing the distance between us. "Then we face them together," I said, though the weight of those words settled heavily. Together might mean destruction as much as it meant defiance. Her eyes softened briefly, but before she could answer, a sound cut through the night, distant at first, then growing. A rumble, low and unnatural, like machinery tearing at stone. She stiffened, her hand darting to the blade at her side. "They are coming," she said, not as a possibility but as certainty. The attack erupted moments later. The building shuddered under an impact, crystalline walls cracking as though struck by thunder. Lights dimmed, alarms shrieked in alien tones. Shadows pawed through the breach, armored figures, not assassins this time, but soldiers loyal to her rivals. Their intent was clear, not capture, not intimidation, but elimination. Terror moved like lightning, blade flashing in arcs that cut through the intruders with precision. I joined her, firing into the advancing line, every shot echoing in the fractured chamber. The room became a storm of light and sound. Shouts, energy bolts, the metallic shriek of clashing weapons. We fought back to back, a rhythm forming between us despite the chaos, her grace complementing my raw ferocity. But they were many, and the walls began to close around us. A strike caught me across the shoulder, burning deep. I staggered, vision swimming, but she pulled me upright with one arm even as she cut down another assailant with the other. "Stay with me," she commanded, her voice fierce. We pushed through the wreckage, step by step, until the chamber's far wall collapsed outward, revealing the night sky and the city sprawling below. Smoke and fire cast strange shadows across the towers, and the sound of battle reverberated through the air. This was no isolated assault. It was an uprising, perhaps the beginning of civil fracture. "They mean to destroy me completely," Tara said, breath harsh, eyes blazing. "And you with me." I looked at her, blood warm against my skin, chest heaving. "Then let's make them regret underestimating us." She almost smiled, a fleeting curve of her lips before her resolve hardened again. Together we leapt into the chaos, descending into streets alive with conflict. The city, once so ordered and luminous, had become a battlefield where loyalties fractured and fear stalked every corner. Her people fought one another, and whispers of my name carried on the smoke, some spitting it like venom, others shouting it as though it were a banner. We fought through the night, never resting, drawn deeper into the storm that my reckless words had helped ignite. At every turn, the question loomed larger. Were we building something new, or dragging each other into ruin? By dawn, the fires still burned, and the city had not chosen its future. Yet as Tara and I stood atop a shattered bridge, watching factions gather in uncertain stalemate, I felt the gravity of the moment press upon us. She looked at me with eyes no longer guarded, no longer frozen. "Whatever comes," she said, her voice raw, "we cannot go back to silence." And I knew then that the conflict had ceased to be Hayes alone. It was ours, bound by truth spoken aloud, fragile yet unbreakable. The future had become a battlefield, and neither of us could retreat. The dawn broke blood-red, painting the fractured skyline with fire that seemed less like sunlight and more like a wound torn into the heavens. Smoke curled upward from the ruins of the night's violence, and the city stirred uneasily beneath it, neither conquered nor free. I stood beside Tara on the shattered plaza where the fighting had last subsided, my arm still bandaged from the burn I'd taken. Around us, her warriors gathered in wary silence, their faces a mixture of loyalty, exhaustion, and doubt. The central conflict had taken shape with brutal clarity. She was no longer merely a commander resisting the council's weight. She had become the symbol of rebellion itself, and by extension, so had I. What had begun as an accidental spark, one phrase spoken without calculation, had ignited into a blaze that neither of us could control. Every path forward bristled with peril, but retreat had already been cut away. "They wait for your word," I murmured to her, watching the crowd. Her jaw tightened, though her posture remained steady. "If I speak too boldly, I fracture what unity we have. If I waver, they abandon me." She turned her gaze to mine, her expression raw with the vulnerability she showed no one else. "I am not certain I am what they need." "You are," I answered without hesitation, though fear hollowed the pit of my stomach. "Because you're the one who refuses to bend to fear. They see that, whether they admit it or not." She studied me for a long moment, and in that silence, the weight between us deepened. Then she raised her voice, addressing the gathered fighters. Her words were sharp, deliberate, like blades forged from conviction. She spoke of survival, of honor, of a future not dictated by stagnant council decrees. She spoke not of conquest but of choice, of a people who could shape their own destiny rather than remain chained to the illusions of tradition. The effect rippled through the crowd like a current-breaking stone. Some dropped to their knees in affirmation, others shouted her name with rising fervor. Yet not all were moved. Several turned away in sullen silence, and a handful broke ranks altogether, vanishing into the smoking streets. Division still festered, and I could see the truth in her eyes even as she inspired them. This was only the beginning, and the path ahead promised more betrayal than triumph. As the voices swelled, a sudden hush fell across the square. Figures emerged at its far edge, clad in the flowing insignia of the council's elite. Not soldiers this time, but emissaries, flanked by guards whose restraint felt thinner than paper. The leader, a tall elder with eyes sharp as ice, stepped forward. His voice carried over the crowd, polished and cold. "You shame your bloodline, Terra. To consort with an alien, to raise arms against your own people. These are not the acts of a commander but of a traitor. Yet even now, the council offers you clemency. Surrender the human, denounce your rebellion, and your station will be restored. Refuse, and the consequences will bury not only you, but all who follow." The silence that followed was suffocating. All eyes turned to her, then to me, the stranger who had become the fulcrum of their fate. I felt the noose tighten invisibly, the weight of lives balanced on the answer neither of us could evade. Tara stepped forward, her blade still sheathed, but her voice unflinching. "You call it consorting. I call it seeing. For the first time, I saw what you fear most, that truth does not belong to your decrees. It belongs to those who dare to speak it aloud. And I will not be silent again." The elder's expression hardened into stone. His hand flicked, a signal to the gods, and in that instant the fragile truce collapsed. Steel hissed free, and the plaza exploded into chaos once more. We fought side by side, the world narrowing into a blur of movement, the clash of blades, the crack of weapons. The emissaries had not come to negotiate, they had come to end her in public, to sever the rebellion at its root. The air thickened with shouts and smoke as loyalists and dissenters collided, the fragile unity shattering into open war. At one moment, a strike nearly reached her throat, and I hurled myself into its path, the force sending me sprawling with blood streaking my side. Her cry tore through the din, but she did not falter. She dragged me back to my feet, fury burning in her every motion, and together we carved through the press until the last of the council's guards fell or fled. When silence finally returned, it was not relief that filled the air, but a deeper tension. The council had revealed its hand. The war was no longer hidden, no longer contained in shadows. The city itself would soon divide in full. Terra stood at the center of it, her chest heaving, her blade slick with battle. She looked at me, not as a commander assessing an ally, but as a woman staring at the choice that had already bound her fate. Her voice, when she spoke, trembled with exhaustion, but not with doubt. "They will come again, stronger, with everything they have left. If we fail, the council will not stop at killing us, they will erase us from memory itself." I met her gaze, pain radiating through every wound, but resolve steadying my voice. "Then we give them a memory they cannot erase." Around us, the survivors began to gather again, bruised but unbroken. Some whispered her name with reverence, others with fear, but all of them stayed. The rebellion had survived another night, and though the future loomed uncertain and terrible, I could feel it. Something greater than either of us had already been set in motion. The city's fate, her people's fate, even humanity's place in this strange, divided world, all of it now hinged on the bond forged in defiance, spoken first in a moment of unguarded truth. And as the smoke cleared, I knew there could be no turning back. The war for survival had become the war for meaning, and the line between the two was gone forever.